It was March of 2017. I was working a seasonal job as a dishwasher in the Rocky Mountains. I was a certified ski bum and daily stoner. I was at a point in my life where I wanted to get away from everything I knew and see a new reality, new perspectives, and new people. It was my sad attempt at running away from past trauma. I thought the answer was to take off with little planning to a job in the Rockies that I had landed from a random Indeed post. At the time, I had nothing going on in my life and was living with my parents, so I said, fuck it, let's go. I began smoking more marijuana than ever before since it was legal in Colorado, and found myself in a dazed, euphoric, and confused state daily, from morning until I went to bed. I was also on prescription antidepressants and benzos I was prescribed for my anxiety. This daily combination affected my ability to work, care, or even form relationships, which was the main purpose of living in a new place. I began to add alcohol into the mix, and things only got worse. When my depression reached a tipping point, I quit the job without notice and packed my shit within a few hours and began the 18-hour car ride back home. Once back in my parents' house, everything only got worse. I had no money and no prospects, so I felt hopeless to the point I didn't even want to search for a new job. My anger grew daily, most likely at myself because I hated the person I had become, and the fact I was so dependent on my medication to just get me through the day without a debilitating panic attack. I began not caring, and my parents could see how fucked up I was getting daily. My mom guilt-tripped me into going into a detox facility to get off the pills and marijuana, while also seeing a chance for me to get counseling because I know deep down both my parents thought I was suicidal. In the facility, all my personal belongings and phone were taken from me, as I expected, and I had nothing to do all day but attend group therapy and talk to staff and other people. Everyone was actually pretty friendly, but the problems came when I was abruptly taken off my medication. I had taken daily for a year and a half and put on a high dose of Effexor, Trazodone, and some other shit I can't even remember the name of. I felt pretty good at first, but within a few days, the real benzo withdrawals hit and I was constantly shaking. They told me I was on a low enough dose that it was safe to come off cold turkey with some alternative medications to help with the anxiety, but that was bullshit. I had nightmares and vivid dreams every single night. I wanted to leave the facility, but the psychiatrist was convinced I was suicidal and was threatening to put me on a 72-hour hold if I wanted to leave voluntarily. So after the 2 weeks were up, my mom picked me up and drove me back home. The drive was silent, I said nothing, and she knew something was off about me. For the next week, I pretty much laid in bed all day, feeling like a zombie. My anxiety was so high, I had to avoid anything that felt stimulating. Exercise, going out in public, even showering. Yes, showering. My heart rate would get incredibly high as soon as the water hit me, and I couldn't stay in. I know now that this is caused by the sudden hot water causing blood pressure to drop and heart rate increase, but to me, it felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I should have seen this as a sign to go to my doctor and tell them that these medications weren't working. Fast forward another week and I went to a job interview that I definitely shouldn't have gone to. It was a sales position and I was nowhere near a salesman. I was an introvert and socially anxious, but I needed the money. She asked me during the interview, "Do you always talk this quietly? If you're going to work here, you're going to have to speak up." I don't remember my response at the time because I was in shock at what she had said to me. After I left, that question kept replaying over and over in my head. My anger grew with each passing hour that evening until I went to bed. The next day, I was in a real fuck it mood and thought I would try to smoke some weed again after taking a 30-milligram Adderall. This was a mistake. I hadn't had any weed since before I went to the treatment facility, so it had been several weeks. I had never taken a break from smoking since I had started the year prior, so I had no idea about how tolerance can basically reset after a period of time. I told my dealer about not having smoked in a while, so I was fiending, and he said, "Dude, you're gonna get high as fuck." I now wish I had listened to that statement. I just laughed and walked out. I was driving through my town wasting time because I didn't want to go back home and thought I'd light up an enormous-sized bowl and drive back to the park and just listen to some music. I took 5 or 6 good hits and coughed like a fucking 2-pack-a-day smoker and blew it out the windows as I rode. After about 5 minutes of driving, the road looked strange and it felt like I was driving backwards and floating in the car. This scared the shit out of me and I immediately noticed my heart rate pounding, probably close to 150 beats per minute. My head felt like my brain was shaking back and forth against the inside of my skull. I trembled and was moving strangely in the car. I had the terrifying realization that I had been smoking for a year while on a high dose of Benzos, and this was the first time I had tried to smoke while not taking them. I felt like I couldn't breathe and began what I assumed was hyperventilating. I continued driving while swerving. This was in broad daylight, mind you, on a weekday. I pulled over in the hospital parking lot after somehow making it there and called my mom because I thought this was the end for me. I told her I loved her and I was sorry for hurting her, but also told her I hated her for manipulating me to go into that fucking treatment clinic. I was crying and hyperventilating, and she came to the hospital parking lot from work and got in my car. She told me to calm down and that I wasn't going to die. It was just a severe panic attack, which I had on past occasions, but this was nothing like those. I had delusions that I was now being punished for all the bad things I had ever done in my life, and my fate was to end up dead in a parking lot. I got out and began pacing back and forth rapidly, and I could see people looking at me from the road driving by. My hair looked wild, and I had taken my shirt off because I thought it would somehow calm me down. She managed to get me back into her vehicle and took me home, and this is where the real madness began. On the way back, I was praying to Jesus Christ to save me from this hell and asking for forgiveness. It's worth nothing that my local church is only a mile from my house, and we rode by it on the way home, and I began to feel the presence of God stretching out his arms and telling me to come to him. Once we got home, I ran to the front yard, shoes now off and nothing but my pants on. I began to kneel and pray to God that I would never do this again and to keep me from dying. I could feel the hot sun hit my back as I knelt down, and it felt as if God were hugging me, bringing me up to him. I looked up into the clouds and images formed of angels who were looking down at me. I then simply laid in the mulch I was in by some bushes and tried to breathe, but I couldn't calm down. I called my dad, who was in another town on business, and manically told him I have to talk to my pastor and give me his number. He was obviously concerned because he had no idea what was going on at this time, and I rambled on about shit, and eventually I hung up. From this point on, my memory is fuzzy, but from what I recall, I got into my dad's second truck he used as a beater. Before I got in, I grabbed several large rocks from the driveway and decided that the lady from the interview was going to get what she deserved. I was not even so much angry as I was in a devious, twisted mindset to get revenge on anyone and everyone who had ever made fun of me or called me quiet. Unluckily for her, she was the target of years of pent-up aggression. I drove to the business and parked in the lot and stared at the windows of the building for about 10 minutes. I have no idea what was going on in my head because it seemed to go by in 10 seconds. I got out and threw a rock as hard as I could directly at the enormous glass windows. Mind you, I used to pitch for a junior college baseball team, so I imagine this rock was flung at around 85 miles per hour. It completely smashed the window, and the reality of what I had done had hit me. I heard a scream and jumped in the truck and took off. I rode, for some reason, back to my house where both my parents were standing in the driveway. They had been trying to call my phone, but I had left it in the yard before I left. As they tried to talk to me, I just walked into my house, no emotion or expression on my face, and sat down on my bedroom floor and stared at my wall. I then realized I need to get the fuck out of there because I know the police are coming. I ran out the back door and into the woods behind our house. As soon as I got back there, I could hear the sound of tires coming down our driveway. I sat behind a tree and began laughing hysterically, but at the same time, I had a terrible feeling of doom. I looked back and saw about 6 police cruisers and 2 sheriff deputy cars in the yard. I heard my dad call my name in a voice that made me feel a mixture of emotions. It was not the angry yell I was used to hearing. It was a sad, scared yell, telling me to come back. I heard a cop yelling as well, and I knew they were going to come for me. I caved and walked up with my hands in the air. I was read my rights and put in the cruiser. I began telling one of the cops my entire life story of always feeling different, quiet, and scared, and that today was the final reckoning of all the wrongs that had been done to me. He actually listened and empathized with me, and I felt a strange sense of peace. They took me into a jail, but for some reason, all my anxiety had vanished. I had deep spiritual conversations with some other people in the cell, and most just laughed, but others joined in, and it felt like a very surreal moment. My parents eventually bailed me out, even though I didn't deserve for them to. Luckily, no charges were filed from the store owner. Over the next few months, I had nightmares of police chasing me, and still do to this day. I eventually began to control my anxiety with some different medication and stopped doing marijuana so heavily. I do see the absurdity of my thinking now about 7 years later, and have since matured a lot. I ended up being diagnosed with bipolar 2, autism spectrum, PTSD, and social anxiety all in that 1 month of March 2017. This trip occurred 2 years ago in the summer when I was 15 years old. I researched a little bit about the plant. I found out that all parts of the plant are poisonous, but I couldn't find any dosage information on eating the seeds. The main chemicals in this plant are tropane alkaloids, scopolamine, atropine, hyoscyamine. Many plants have tropane alkaloids like datura, henbane, and European mandrake, but Atropa belladonna is very high up in potency. So I ordered a 1/4 ounce of these seeds online, as they are legal. A 1/4 ounce comes with approximately 7,000 seeds. I decided to start off slow with about 50 seeds. These seeds are very small, like the size of poppy seeds. I wasn't feeling anything after them, so I jumped to 200. I still wasn't feeling anything, so I went to sleep. The next day, I decided to take another shot at it. I started off with about 200 seeds, waited about 2 hours, and nothing was happening. I then took about 600 more seeds. I waited another 2 hours. I wasn't feeling anything again, but when I saw myself in the mirror, my pupils were dilated almost to the size of my whole eyeball. Eye doctors use atropine to dilate pupils. I was getting mad because it was taking so long to start working, and I didn't even know if it was going to work, so I just downed about 900 more seeds. Me and 2 of my friends start walking to a firehouse fair a few blocks away to check it out. I start feeling my motor skills decreasing. When we get to the fair, it is about 7 p.m. and we just sit down with a few friends for like an hour, just talking and watching the fair. After about a half an hour, I get up and start walking. My motor skills just keep decreasing. I think the ground is shifting under me, like in one of those funhouse type things. I keep on tripping. Well, I am tripping, but tripping over the shifting grounds. So one of my friends and I decide to leave because there are cops, and I was getting very messed up. So we went to a park around the block. We sit on a bench, and I decide to smoke a bowl of weed. I am incapable of packing the bowl, and I just get too tired to try anymore, so I put everything down and going in a corner by some bushes. I start feeling the leaves and taking bites out of some, while my friend is sleeping on the bench. I don't know how long I was sitting by the bushes, but it seemed long and short at the same time. I wake my friend up and she wants to go home. She doesn't know my part of the neighborhood well, so she asked me to walk with her. We start walking down the blocks. I'm just walking on the sidewalks, trying not to fall. I start climbing mountains, which were really just cracks in the sidewalk. I then come across a mushroom on the grass. It looks so amazing. My friend yells to me, and when I look back, the mushroom is gone. We keep walking. We've been walking in circles. I forgot where we were supposed to go, but we finally made it to my house and we went our separate ways. While I'm at home in my room for a while, I come out into the kitchen to get a drink. My mother comes in and asks me who I was talking to in my room. I tell her it's my friend Dan, who was one of the friends I had over earlier. She tells me to ask him to leave or she'll call his parents because it's too late. I actually thought it was daytime, but it was really 3 in the morning. So I go back into my room, but I can't find him. My mom follows me around the house looking for him. I check in closets, in the basement. I thought he was hiding. I checked the backyard and said there was a hole in the fence that he must have left through the back. Now I go back in my room alone for a while. My mom then comes in my room for some reason. I tell her I can't sleep because there are seeds all over my bed. She asks me to show her what seeds, so I start picking up nothing very carefully and putting nothing into my mom's open hand. She then tells me to go to sleep in her bed, but I couldn't in there because there were seeds in her bed too, so I go back into my room again. After a while, I go into the bathroom and start playing with the hand soap dispenser bottle. I would keep on putting it on different shelves, bring it into my room, and my mom would just keep moving it back. Later that night, my mom finds me hysterically laughing at myself in the bathroom mirror, saying that there is 3 of me. In the morning, I'm still very out of my mind, so my dad tells me to get into the car. We start driving and my brothers follow behind. I just thought that we were going on an outing. We finally parked and reached a big building. I told my brother I thought we were in California. I then told my dad that I was a vampire as I sucked blood from my finger, which really wasn't there. When we got into a building, I was taken into a room. It took me about 15 minutes to realize that I was in a hospital. I started going nuts. I started fighting guards. It took about 5 guards and my brother to hold me down, but I just submitted to them because while the fight was going on, I saw a baby stroller in the room and I accidentally kicked it, making me feel guilty, so I let go. I was then given a shot of a tranquilizer. I forgot what it was called and was strapped down to a stretcher and taken into another room. In this room, I could see out the open door, people that I knew from my school, but they weren't really there. I then was seeing scorpion-like creatures crawling and flipping over each other on the walls. I also thought I saw a laptop at the end of the stretcher and thought it was mine, but I couldn't get it because I was tied down. I was then being pushed on the stretcher. A hole opened up in the wall and I was taken through a secret passageway in circles. Obviously that wasn't real either, but I was taken to the ICU. There, the trip started getting harder. I thought that I was in a school auditorium and a game show was going on the stage. I saw a girl next to me that I fell in love with. I felt the love through my body. It was a blonde girl with no eyes. She was also deaf and mute with electricity running through her completely black mouth. After a bunch of stuff I don't really remember, smoke canisters were thrown through windows in the auditorium, spewing smoke all over. I then snapped out. I was tripping for 3 days. I blacked out for a lot of the stuff, but my parents and brothers told me about some stuff that happened. I was put in a straitjacket that had ties from head to toe. I yelled and cursed at the doctors and nurses. At one point, they had me wear a diaper, even though I wasn't going to the bathroom. They didn't want to give me a catheter because they were afraid of what might happen. I had to be given baths. I was treated like a baby because I was completely out of my mind and didn't know what was going on. My mom told me that when she went back home, she found a glass in the fridge with the top of a spray bottle in it. Also, the top of the soap dispenser thing was missing, and my brother found it in a tissue box. This was definitely the most intense trip I ever had, and I will never forget it. I might do it again, but not anytime soon. I am growing it now to save it for the future. Overall, I ate about 1,500 seeds and tripped for 3 days. I didn't really know I was tripping. I was just taken to a different world, and all the stuff that happened there was normal. The addiction to dissociative drugs is very strange. I've tried many drugs before PCE, which are mephedrone, methcathinone, methamphetamine, benzos and some barbiturates, tramadol, and probably a few others. First, a bit about me. I'm a chemistry student and made many drugs I tried myself, and at one point, I got interested in dissociative drugs. I wanted to make some PCP and try that, but to do it, I would have needed piperidine, which is restricted exactly for that reason. However, I could get ethylamine, so I used that instead, and through a pretty simple and quick synthesis, I got a few grams of PCE freebase as a very strange smelling liquid. It is colorless immediately after making it, but quickly turns yellow and then dark orange when exposed to air. So I diluted some of the freebase in N-propanol and measured 2 milligrams and took it, but besides some placebo, I didn't notice much. I started to feel a bit weird with 5 milligrams, but was only really satisfied at 15. It was the strangest feeling, unlike anything I have tried before. I did not really feel my legs anymore, so walking felt like floating, and everything just felt kinda new and strange to me. It actually didn't really feel addictive. At first, it even seemed strange to me how people could get addicted to that, but but over the next months, I learned how sneaky addiction to dissociative drugs creep up on you. The next day was also pretty strange and kinda scary. I felt a little bit like I was the protagonist in this world, and everything other people were doing was centered around me. That wasn't nice, and I was a bit scared that I messed myself up with this drug, but I think it faded pretty quickly. So over the next few weeks, I think I used this drug occasionally. I didn't crave it, but it was so strange and weird. I felt like I was escaping in my PCE world far away. It just seemed like some innocent and fun thing for me to do, and during this time, I was able to characterize the effects of this drug a bit more. A common theme would be that the world around me would just seem like it's less detailed. For instance, I would look at a landscape and just think, wow, that looks so simple and bland. It felt quite a lot like being in a video game. That was also true for how my body felt. Things like walking or running felt like they were happening automatically. I just kinda had to think of walking and I would move forward. Oftentimes I would also just feel like a robot and would awkwardly stomp when walking. Movement overall felt extremely effortless, so running a longer distance seemed like barely any effort to me. Distances in different places also kinda lost their meaning, and I didn't really feel different no matter where I was. Generally, I just felt kinda like I was floating somewhere outside of this thing that is my body, and just detached from it. It also affected all my other senses in that way. I wouldn't really enjoy eating on PCE because it makes everything just taste very bland. With music, it was the opposite. Any song I listened to would just sound very flat and as if it was being played like 100 meters away from me. The high points in a song would sound less high or special, and the low points less low. I also kinda lost my feeling for time, so when I was listening to a song, it felt like I'd been listening to this song forever. The different parts of the song also seemed like they weren't really connected. Listening to music on PCE was just overall extremely strange. The in real life sounds would also be very weird. It would seem like everything in a 1 kilometer radius around me would be completely silent, and there would be a huge loud construction site far away. Often it would seem like the sound around me would have tiny waves in it, which is really difficult to explain. It's very similar to nitrous oxide, but more in the background. On higher doses, like 25 milligrams, I would overall just feel completely detached from my body and my entire life. In that state, I couldn't really understand anymore why I should care about this random character I'm controlling in this world. I just felt like nothing that would happen to me is important in any way. I remember one time during the night where I was in my room, just completely dissociated on a high dose of PCE. I was browsing on a dating site, and then I suddenly questioned why I should even care about that. Why does it matter if this random thing that is me is in a relationship? I felt like I was free from my body. I was sitting in my chair thinking, if someone would enter this room right now with a knife and try to cut my throat, I think I would just let it happen. Sometimes these states would also have a really depressing overtone. I would then question why I even live. Everything you would normally live for, like engaging in hobbies, music, food, love, traveling, sex. Anything that would normally bring this thing pleasure absolutely didn't make any sense to me in this state. Even the concept of pleasure was just gone. I was completely in the void, and nothing in life would mean anything to me anymore. But overall, I liked these states. I was also detached from all my worries and problems. If I wasn't completely gone, it just kind of felt like I was floating outside my normal life, just observing it. I could see so many opportunities and ways out of situations that normally seem pretty hopeless to me. And I think that was actually quite therapeutical. Therefore, I'm actually still not sure if this drug harmed or benefited me overall, because many things I learned on PCE still stick with me today. But I was also quite depressed at the time and absolutely overused this drug to the extreme. At some points, I dosed 50 milligrams just because my tolerance was so high. This drug doesn't have a come down like the stimulants, and also doesn't cause physical dependence like benzos or barbiturates, which to me seemed like a free pass to completely go overboard with it. But at some point, I did pay the price for it. One morning, I just didn't feel right, but I absolutely couldn't tell what was wrong. Physically, I was fine. I wasn't depressed or unmotivated, but something was really wrong. I felt like there was something in my head screaming at me, telling me with everything exactly how I have to do it. After reading a bit online, I knew I fucked up and had a psychosis from the extreme abuse. This psychosis was worse than anything else I have ever experienced, like stimulant come-downs, benzo withdrawals, nothing compared to this. I felt mentally ill, and this thing, voice, whatever it was, screaming at me all day long, telling me what to do. When trying to fall asleep, I would have audio hallucinations of objects falling and voices calling my name. It was insanely terrifying. One night I was so terrified, I was crying and calling people on my phone because I was so scared. I would try anything, alcohol, benzos, barbiturates, even antipsychotics in hopes it would make me feel a bit better. This horrific state lasted for about 2 weeks, but after some time, I went back to the PCE. PCE abuse generally just threw my emotions and mental state into complete chaos. Even when I wouldn't use it, I would randomly just feel euphoric, depressed, anxious, horny. It was weird. Since I would be in this dreamy and floaty state so much, I often wasn't sure if I did something or just was dreaming about it. I would also feel weirdly more social, but not in a nice way, and I wasn't good at socializing because my behavior was just really strange and probably creeped people out. PCE also caused me extreme disinhibition. I regret many things I did when using this drug. I sometimes showed up in school when I was somewhat on it. I wanted to see if it would make school more bearable, but it made it impossible. I could barely write since I couldn't really control my hand movements very well. My handwriting was unidentifiable. My speech was also messed up, and I couldn't pronounce words very well since my mouth just felt numb, and it generally often just made me feel extremely anxious in public. But often it also was extremely mood-lifting, but extremely disorienting. I couldn't really find my way anywhere in public. PCE isn't really a social drug in my opinion. I couldn't really talk with people since I felt like I was kind of floating somewhere else. I wanted to be in my room and dissociate during the night and just watch the show. That was generally a theme with PCE. It doesn't really make me euphoric or relaxed or feel really pleasant. It was just extremely entertaining. Sometimes I would experience something that I can only describe as Alice in Wonderland effect, and I would get extremely excited whenever that would happen. It is usually about 30 to 60 minutes in, which I would just completely lose sense of how big and how close everything around me would be. I would, for instance, look at my hands, and it would look like as if they were really tiny, but also take up my entire field of vision. I would look at my phone screen and it would seem tiny, while the apps on it would look huge, way too big as that they could fit in that tiny screen, but they do. I would just be amazed and play around with random objects, which just constantly seemed to change size and shape while I hold them. I would take a drinking glass and I would suddenly seem like it expands to the size of a swimming pool in my hand. I would just take objects and compare them side by side because I just had no idea how big they actually were. This effect wasn't very reliable, not even with a high dose. It would just happen every once in a while, and I absolutely loved it. I eventually stopped using PCE after I had my second psychotic episode from it, which probably was even worse than the first one, and almost costed me my life. One extremely scary effect PCE can have is that my body seemed to do things I couldn't control, and I would just do random things, sometimes maybe even violent things. At some point, I was just standing in the kitchen crying because I was scared I would just suddenly hurt my cats. I ended up locking myself in my room for the rest of the day, just away from any pets. One really bad way to deal with such psychotic episodes is alcohol. One time, I apparently was just so out of it and drunk, worth about 300 to 400 milliliters of pure alcohol. I couldn't remember anything of this besides waking up in the hospital, and I'm still ashamed that this ever happened. Apparently, I stopped breathing and almost died. After that, I somehow had to survive 2 weeks in this horrible state, after which I luckily was fine again. I threw the rest of the PCE away after that. Overall, I think it was a pretty interesting experience, and even though it ended on such a negative note, I don't really regret it. I don't think negatively about PCE. I say it's an absolutely amazing drug if one is responsible with it. Panaeolus cyanescens is a coprophilous, dung-inhabiting species which grows in tropical and neotropical areas in both hemispheres. Lossman and Sigrun Mueller-Giebling, 2010, reported the presence of psilocybin at 2.5% and psilocin at 1.194% average from 25 samples seized by German customs that were shipments from commercial growers, making modern commercially cultivated strains of this species the most potent hallucinogenic mushrooms ever described in reputable published research. Other researchers have documented a significant presence of serotonin and urea in the species, as well as the presence of biocystin, which may also be psychoactive. So this mushroom is the strongest one to date, and we're about to read 2 stories where people took it and had terrible times. To give you an idea of my background, I have been using psilocybin mushrooms for 5 years now. Just until recently have I been taking very large dosages. For the past 6 months, I've been taking the mushrooms every 2 weeks. Upon every experience, I would ask myself questions about space, time, gods, entities, and reality. Well, this last trip gave me all the answers I needed. The answer drove me completely insane. It all started when I went to my buddy Jay's house. We took 2 ounces of purple ringers, cubensis, and 2 ounces of Panaeolus cyanescens, blue meanies, chopped them up on a tray, and began to boil them. After about 20 minutes, the brew was cooled enough to drink. I chugged my cup of thick purple syrup and began the wait. 45 minutes in, it wasn't a usual come-up. It felt so intense in my body. It was hard to talk or think. Everything was swaying and changing colors. At this point, the come-up normally slows down, and I feel normal and just trip. Not this time. An hour and a half in, I felt as if my brain has been defragmented. Nothing looked real. Everything looked alien. I thought my body has been transported into another dimension. I could see through the spaces of time and reality, and I thought this was the peak. Jay and I didn't speak much, just glanced at each other, because we knew we were both going through the same thing. We just asked questions in confusion, because at that point we didn't know the difference between anything. I had a pack of cigarettes in my hand. I stared in complete confusion, wondering what the device was. 2.5 hours in. This is the point where things got way too real. I was convinced I was the only soul in this dimension, that Earth is nothing but a desert with no life except my own. I could see my insane self inside of my head, screaming for companionship in this lonely desert. I realized that everything around me that I see normally is nothing but a creation of my own mind, that my body is a virus constricting my soul, built by the aliens to create something for them, but who knows what. I thought all my friends and family are my own mental creation, just to convince myself I'm not insane. All of history was written by me, sending myself messages from my past lives, just so in this moment, I will realize the truth. I felt as if I discovered the meaning of life. I could completely see it. There is no feeling like the feeling of discovering every belief you have ever had is nothing but a delusion. I could see the building block of reality, the threads that hold space and time together. The television was in slow motion and screaming at me, telling me everything I've ever believed is a lie, that my body is nothing but the entrapment of a soul, and without my body, my soul will shoot through space at the speed of light, allowing me to be in control of all dimensions. This part of the trip lasted about 6 to 7 hours. It felt like longer because everything felt like I was stuck in a loop, the loop of eternal mental damnation. I couldn't escape. My friend Jay sat there staring at me with a smile on his face. I didn't even have to talk. I felt as if we had a telepathic link. Later when I asked him, he said he felt the same way. No words were needed. This trip was 2 months ago. Even when I think about it now, chills consume my body because I can remember the feeling of discovering the meaning of life. The realization that everything around me is produced by me, the reality producing machine, and how I am alone in this world, insane with delusion. I have done mushrooms a few times since, but every time I take them, I go back to the same place. The reoccurring bad trip that is too intense for me to handle. even in smaller doses. My psilocybin experience is over, and I think it may have rendered me mentally insane. I had been interested in psychedelics for about 3 years, and I've taken LSD and mushrooms to gain more knowledge, enjoy my trip, and learn more about myself. I do realize the consequences of taking these drugs at a young age. It was about a month or 2 ago. I had bought 7 grams of blue meanie mushroom strain from a friend of mine for my boyfriend and I. We had taken them the next day. He took 3.4 grams. He is heavier than me. He should have taken more. And I took 3.6 grams dipped in peanut butter, which I had regretted afterwards. We had planned our day out and were going to his friend's house to hang out for a bit. We were waiting for the peak. About an hour or less later, my body started to feel heavy and hallucinations were starting to get stronger. His friend finally arrived home and I was starting to get out of it. This had been my most intense mushroom experience, and as soon as I walked in the door, I sat down next to my boyfriend's friend's mom and told her that I am tripping on mushrooms and I am not okay. I can't remember the conversation after that, but my boyfriend's friend told us that we had to go on a ride to get his girlfriend, so my boyfriend and I sat in the back seat of his friend's stick and we drove out to the mall. Looking out the window, everything was warping and moving, trees were growing huge, and the car looked like it had a 360 lens on it. The music was awesome until a sound of nature started playing. I started tripping out. I didn't know if it was real or not, and I started freaking out. I'm not exactly sure why. My boyfriend's friend started playing High C, and I started vibing to it. We had finally arrived to the mall, which felt like it had taken hours to get there, but it was only 20 minutes. His girlfriend got into the car, and then my stomach started feeling upset after eating all those mushrooms. My boyfriend told me that eating these things is basically poisoning yourself, and I took that all too seriously. My whole body felt tingly, like the mushrooms were trying to get out of me. I folded and was sitting in an odd position. My boyfriend was tapping me and asking me if I was okay, but I was so out of it that I kept forgetting to respond, so I just said unicorn turtle beach ball. I couldn't comprehend anything that was happening until we got back to his friend's house. His mom asked if I was okay, and my boyfriend just took me down to his basement. There was an Xbox, so we were just watching Family Guy. My body was aching so unbelievably bad. It felt like spikes were jabbing at it. I had a hard time walking, and as soon as I sat down, I started bawling my eyes out. I was telling my boyfriend how I need to go to a mental institution and that I need to get help. He told me to stop thinking like that. I was trying to. I started bawling again, sobbing. Not the cute kind of sobbing, the ugly kind where snot is coming out of your nose. I kept thinking how my life is a movie, and I kept on thinking about the memories of summer and how choices have no consequences, and that I can just change my whole life by speaking my mind or doing just one simple thing. Create and cause dysfunction throughout every relationship and friendship I have had in my whole life. I sat there crying for what felt like an hour. I felt like puking, but could only dry heave. My boyfriend was holding me, telling me it will be alright, and that I do not need to go to a mental hospital. He kept on reassuring me and holding me. I had finally spun back into reality. I started laughing. I told him that it's just another Monday. He started to smile, and then he said to me, "We do this all the time. Just another day. Just another week. Me and you are Jesse and Jane," referring to Breaking Bad, one of our favorite shows. He said I knew how these things worked. Shrooms come in waves. I tried watching a bit of Family Guy until I started to freak out more because I kept hearing noises coming from upstairs. That's when my boyfriend's friend came down and told us that we need to leave since he's going out somewhere. I started freaking out because I had grown an attachment to his basement. I could barely walk or see anything as my vision was completely covered in hallucinations of my own imagination. I forgot how to walk, so I was stumbling down the street to get to my car. My boyfriend had to drive since he felt more in control of his trip, but the thing is that he is not as experienced in driving as I am, and he doesn't even have his permit. I did not care a single bit. I told him I need to lay down in the back and let myself calm down. We had finally arrived to his house, and seconds later, I had forgotten who I was. I forgot everything about myself, where I was at. All I knew is that I felt like vomiting. We went upstairs to his room and I went on. She asked where my phone was to call my mom, and I had Thank God I wasn't the only non-sober person in the room. He asked how many grams I took. I told him a bit too much. I was starting to regain abilities in walking, and everything turned out okay. My boyfriend's mom didn't trust me after that, and my boyfriend tells me he gets a lot of anxiety whenever he thinks of it. I still have nightmares about it and flashbacks from time to time, which is why that'll be the last time I take shrooms for a while. To quote Hunter S. Thompson, the only thing that really worried me was the ether. There's nothing in the world more helpless and irresponsible and depraved than a man in the depths of an ether binge, and I knew we'd get into that rotten stuff pretty soon. Oh, the deprivation it does indeed cause. I found myself watching Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, seeing them trip, if you may call it trip, on ether. How to do it, where to get it. Thank you for the internet. Within minutes, I was at the gas station across the street buying a canister of your everyday starter fluid. Great, $2, and I was set. I went home, diluted the ether in a plastic Ziploc bag, and was set to go. I poured it onto a rag and went inhale crazy. It was intense at first, very intense smell I do mean. In the film they practically shove the rag up their nose, but the smell permeates the room so I get a sense of what I will be putting near your nose, and I start to not like it. I do it anyways, and within 4 huffs, 4 good, decent Johnny Depp-sized huffs, I'm gone. Gone unlike anything that I've ever been gone on before. I couldn't talk right. Echoes. Everywhere there were echoes. My friend had Fear and Loathing on his computer, so he put it back on the ether part. The echoing was too intense. I turned and saw Seinfeld on the television. Better. Not intense echoing, but they still had a nice echo. As ether does, it soon wore off. My friend was convinced to try it as I had just explained the past few moments. We both dug our noses in it. This time, I knew where the echoing was coming from. My mind was a few seconds behind my senses. Everything I saw, heard, and felt was like deja vu, intense deja vu. I had seen patterns, this odd green and red swirling saying something like, game over. I saw it everywhere, making the swirling pattern out of everything I saw. The TV screen, the computer monitor, the odd crisscrossing of the wood under the kitchen chairs. But I had seen all this before. Somewhere. Online perhaps. Yeah, somewhere online I saw a movie of what this was like. But of course, after coming down again, I tried to search for this vision of this movie I had seen. Nothing. More times I huffed, euphoria now, yet that deja vu still set in. The last thing I remembered that night was watching Fear and Loathing, all curled up and seeing scenes that upon rewatching the movie showed that those scenes had never existed. Fast forward about a month later. 2 of my other friends and I began watching Fear and Loathing, and we said ether. Why not? I had vials of it now. I was producing it to sell here and there, so I grabbed one and started in. This time, however, I did more than I've ever done. I hit my plateau and kept going. I fell out of my chair. My friend was talking to me incoherently. He was trapped in a well, he told me. He slapped my hand. I pulled my hand away quickly and almost took a third-person perspective on what was going on. My hand to my elbow fell off and started to slinky around, just end over end, and my friend who decided to not participate watched my hand. Suddenly, he locked eyes with me and didn't move. I started to move my legs, but they moved spastically, but I saw him doing it, not myself. I/he realized what was going on with the legs and started to hit them, saying something like, "Stupid legs, they need to stop." He watched them stop going so spastically, then into a square step-like pattern. He grabbed the legs and screamed, "I got it!" I don't know what I got, but it seemed like the view I was looking at this whole mess was from a deep view into fate. I saw my friend doing these things in my mind, yet I would involuntarily do them immediately afterwards, like he was my voodoo doll of myself. I suddenly saw my arm reaching for the doorknob outside, and I ripped it open and ran. I ran across the yard, no shoes, with snow on the ground. I saw things everywhere, this repetition of what had just happened and what was going to happen. Again, I thought I had seen this online somewhere and could understand it as a warning someone had made about ether and what happens if you took too much. Your body just dies and your mind gets trapped in this world of a third-person view of fate and reliving what had just happened. This continuous loop of what would happen and what had. I thought, I need to break this loop, run to the store. That would change this line of fate. No shoes. Go to the house. No, the garage. The garage window. Break it. You wouldn't just break it for no reason. Break it. Break this like of fate. But suddenly I could see breaking this window would be a new part of the line of fate. No way to escape. Suddenly my dad opened the door and told me to get inside. I went in. He could smell the ether. Asked me what it was, and I realized I was out of that third-person view. I said I don't know what it is. I was out of my car looking for my iPod cord. I went to tell my friends what had happened. They were scared because of the screaming and then the running outside. I tried to explain this fate thing, but nothing. I just curled up and went to bed. To this day, I haven't done ether that hard, just small little hits to get a small buzz. I was scared to death of being stuck in that place of fate, and I am still not sure if it could still happen.